Welcome to Life Stories, where the people who were supposed to protect us sometimes become the ones we have to protect ourselves from. Imagine opening your door to the family you've always tried to make proud, only to realize they've already decided your place in their world is gone. Not just your seat at the table, but your name on the deed, your photos on the wall, your history erased. This isn't just a story about a stolen house. It's about gaslighting disguised as love, betrayal whispered over dinner, and the quiet strength it takes to fight back when no one believes you should. If you've ever been made to feel like a guest in your own life, this story is for you. Let's go back to where it began, before the locks were changed, before the silence became a weapon, before she stopped asking for permission to exist. Cassidy Sloan opened the oven door and let the scent of cinnamon and rosemary drift through her small but meticulously curated home. The cobbler browned perfectly on the edges, just as she remembered her grandmother used to make it. She wiped her hands on a towel that still held traces of last summer's lavender detergent and glanced at the table. Every place setting had been arranged with quiet reverence. Her late grandmother's china, the silverware she found secondhand and polished until it gleamed, and laminated name cards she'd printed at work on her lunch break, because presentation mattered. She'd spent 3 days scrubbing floors, ironing curtains, folding napkins into half-hearted roses. This was more than dinner. This was the first time Cassidy was hosting anyone since closing on the house she bought herself. The one she earned through long shifts, skipped vacations, and nights spent alone with spreadsheets instead of friends. She had imagined this moment so many times, her father nodding in quiet approval, her mother finally smiling without judgment in her eyes, her sister Riley not rolling her eyes and checking out mid-sentence. Maybe, just maybe, they would see her, not as the emotional one, not as the overachiever with something to prove, but as a woman who built something real. By 6:32 p.m., headlights swept across the front window. Cassidy adjusted the wine bottle on the table for the fourth time and smoothed the hem of the skirt she wasn't used to wearing. The knock came sharp, unceremonious. She opened the door with a smile she had rehearsed in the mirror, earnest, inviting, just restrained enough not to seem desperate. "Smells like food," Riley said first, stepping in without a greeting. She wore suede boots and a trench coat, tracking faint dust on the floors Cassidy had mopped twice. Martin followed, her father nodding slightly as his eyes roamed the ceiling and corners of the room, like he was appraising a property he might flip. "This place has good bones," he said, not quite a compliment. "Feels like it should belong to everyone, doesn't it?" Cassidy let out a small laugh. "It's cozy, I think." Diane came in last. Her mother's silence was a thing Cassidy had come to recognize as sharper than any word. She walked past Cassidy without acknowledgement, running her fingers across the mantel where a framed photo of them from a beach trip years ago had once stood. That picture had been a fragile peace offering. Cassidy had chosen it because they were all smiling, real smiles, before things became transactional. Dinner passed in uneasy beats. Riley scrolled under the table, like her fingers tapping endlessly. Martin asked how Cassidy could afford hardwood floors. Diane commented on the timing of the roast. No one asked about her promotion. No one mentioned the framed certificate on the wall. Dessert came. She presented the cobbler like a relic, explaining each ingredient. They barely acknowledged it. Then, as Cassidy reached for the plates, Martin stood, folded his napkin precisely, and looked at her the way he had when she bought her first car without asking. There was a shift in his jaw, small, calculated. "We've discussed it," he said. Cassidy blinked. "What?" "This house should come back to the family," Diane added softly, eyes on her empty glass. "You've done well, honey, but it's too much for one person. We think it's time you recenter." Riley leaned back. "It's not personal." Cassidy's chair scraped as she stood. "Excuse me?" "You'll always have a place," Martin continued. "Your old room's still there, but we'll be moving in. Riley's already working on the renovation plans." Cassidy couldn't speak. The air left her lungs as Riley walked out of the room and returned with Cassidy's green suitcase, the same one she'd used to move to college. "We packed your essentials," Riley said, "just so it's smooth." I'm the legal owner, Cassidy finally whispered. Martin's smile was tight. We'll sort that. She didn't cry. Instead, she reached for the house keys she had polished that morning, placed them beside her untouched wine glass, and walked out. The air outside was sharp, like reality itself was snapping back into focus. She drove without a destination, the suitcase thumping in the backseat like a heartbeat, reminding her she was still real. At a gas station on the edge of town, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. "This is Cassidy," she answered, her voice flat. "Hi, Miss Sloan. This is Alexis from First Horizon Bank's mortgage department. We're calling to confirm some recent changes requested on your account." Cassidy's chest tightened. What kind of changes? Co-owners were being added, a new primary contact. But the request didn't come through our secure portal and seemed inconsistent, so we flagged it. You are still listed as the sole legal owner. No co-owners, nothing shared. Who requested the changes? Cassidy asked, though she already knew. Martin and Diane Sloan. She didn't respond right away. It wasn't surprise. It was the certainty that comes when something you've suspected for years finally hardens into fact. Later that night, she parked outside Jordan's apartment, her best friend. The only person left who didn't make love feel conditional. She didn't go in, just sat in silence until Jordan opened the passenger door without asking, slid in, and sat beside her. Cassidy spoke, voice hollow. They weren't reacting. They planned it. Jordan nodded slowly. Then let's make sure they regret it. Have you ever questioned whether your family's love came with terms? What would you do if the people who raised you tried to erase your life and replace it with their own? But Cassidy was about to discover this betrayal went deeper than real estate, and far beyond what even she imagined. Cassidy didn't sleep that night. The couch in Jordan's apartment was soft but foreign, the air inside still heavy with the scent of clove and cedarwood candles, like a borrowed calm. She lay wrapped in a blanket with her hoodie still on, staring at the ceiling, willing her mind to quiet. But the silence only echoed louder. In that stillness, something unspooled, memory, regret, and something colder. A dawning realization that her family hadn't just broken a boundary. They had been drawing new ones in secret for years, hoping she wouldn't notice until they'd crossed them all. At 6:12 a.m., she sat up, her hands trembling slightly as she opened her laptop. Her login to the cloud backup system still worked. A few years ago, after a break-in scare in her old apartment, she had installed a motion-triggered security system throughout the house. It uploaded clips to a private drive, just in case. She hadn't looked at it since moving in. Now, the footage felt like a lifeline. Click by click, she watched her life being unwound. Diane sorting through drawers in Cassidy's office with clinical precision. Riley removing framed photos from the hallway, replacing them with new ones already printed. Martin sitting at her desk, his hands familiar yet alien, typing something, possibly the forged co-ownership forms, and then leaning back like he was settling into his own seat at a company he never built. They weren't trespassers, they were settlers. Cassidy didn't cry. She renamed each clip with the date, time, and description. Then she created a folder and titled it simply, The Theft. It wasn't dramatic, it was accurate. As she saved the last clip, an old voicemail caught her eye, a message left on her landline 2 weeks before the dinner. Her finger hovered. Then she pressed play. Once she's out, a woman's voice, Riley, said, clean and detached, "Don't let her back in." Not even for the photo albums. It hit her harder than any insult ever could. Not because of the words, but because of the tone. No rage, no apology, just logistics. As if she were a box of clutter being scheduled for removal. The next morning, Jordan poured 2 mugs of coffee and set one in front of her. Cassidy stared into the steam like it might hold answers. "They didn't just act," she said quietly. "They planned. They counted on me not seeing it until it was too late." "Then let's show them you did," Jordan replied, reaching for her phone. "I know someone. Lawyer. Sharp. No patience for people who weaponize blood ties." By noon, they were sitting in a sunlit office downtown across from Ava Hernandez. Crisp blazer, short hair, calm eyes. Ava didn't gasp. She didn't console. She listened. "This isn't uncommon," she said finally. People think real estate theft comes from strangers. It doesn't. It comes from the people who think your name on a deed is just a formality. Cassidy nodded slowly. I want to fight. All of it. Not just for the house, but for the truth. I want documentation. I want to leave a record they can't erase. Ava smiled faintly. Then we'll build your case like they built their lie, piece by piece. That night, Cassidy opened her email and sent Ava the folder. The security footage, the audio recordings, copies of her notarized ownership documents. She found her original deed, mortgage closing statement, and proof of full payment, all signed, time-stamped, clean. She labeled them, formatted them, printed them with a kind of reverence. This wasn't paperwork. This was identity. Later, as she scrolled her inbox, a name popped up she hadn't seen in over a year, Clayton. They'd broken up quietly last fall, a slow fading rather than a spark burned out. He had always been calm, logical, emotionally temperature-controlled. She hadn't planned to reach out, but now something in her wanted an outsider's ears, a sounding board, not a savior. They met at the same cafe they used to frequent, still decorated with too many Edison bulbs. He was already sipping an Americano when she sat down. My parents tried to steal my house, she said, no preamble. Clayton blinked. Wait, like actually? They changed the locks, falsified documents, told the bank they were co-owners. He shifted uncomfortably. That's intense, but they're still your family, right? The word landed like a slap. I used to think that meant something, Cassidy replied. Turns out it just made me easier to target. He gave a non-committal shrug. Maybe just let things cool off? Families go through weird phases. Cassidy stood. People who don't believe you when you speak quietly, she said, don't deserve to hear you roar. She didn't wait for him to respond. Back at Jordan's apartment, she sat cross-legged on the floor, papers spread around her like battle plans. Ava joined via video call. We'll file a cease and desist tomorrow, she said, and start drafting a restraining order. They made this legal when they falsified financial information. You're not just a homeowner now, Cassidy. You're a litigant. And somehow that word didn't scare her. It clarified her. Later that night, as Cassidy tried logging into her smart home control system, the password failed. Then again, access denied. The house had been renamed. Not Cassidy's home. Tate Family Residence, her mother's maiden name. She closed the laptop slowly. They weren't just trying to steal her house. They were trying to rewrite the story. Make it theirs. Delete the author, and that's when she knew. For all their confidence, they underestimated the one thing she never stopped building. Her proof. How would you react if someone you trusted to rewrite your entire life and expected you to stay silent about it? But the next piece Cassidy uncovers won't just threaten her legal case. It will unravel everything she believed about how far her family was willing to go. The truth isn't finished revealing itself. Cassidy stood across the street from the house that still carried her name in legal ink, but not in presence. It had changed, not just the locks or the curtains, but the spirit of it. What once held her quiet victories now echoed with stolen echoes. Yet here she was, manila envelope in hand, flanked by 2 sheriff's deputies delivering a cease and desist letter that read like both a declaration and a eulogy. She didn't step onto the porch. She stayed on the sidewalk, letting the brittle winter wind tangle her hair and sting her cheeks as the officers knocked. From behind the window, she watched as Martin opened the door. Diane stood just behind him, arms folded like she was preparing for a cold front, not a reckoning. Cassidy couldn't hear what was said, but she saw the shift. The way Martin's posture stiffened, Diane's chin rose in that familiar defensive tilt. It wasn't guilt. It was inconvenience. And somehow that hurt more. They hadn't expected her to fight. They had written her out of the story and assumed she'd fold quietly. But there she was, watching them absorb the first real consequence of a lifetime of subtle theft. Back at Jordan's apartment, Cassidy played the final voicemail. A low, male voice, familiar but unnamed, rasped through her speaker. You haven't seen what we're capable of. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was a warning spoken with the confidence of someone who had always gotten away with everything. She forwarded it to Ava, who replied with only one line, "We move faster now." By the end of the week, Cassidy had filed for a restraining order, submitted identity theft reports, and documented every bank inquiry traced back to the Tate address. Jordan helped scan the documents, Ava assembled the exhibits, and a paralegal submitted them to the courthouse like chapters in a story no one had expected her to finish writing. Then came the recording. A file emailed anonymously to her inbox titled simply, "For Your Case." It was grainy, captured from a dash cam, but the voices were clear. We start with the key. She'll cry first, then call a lawyer. It won't hold in court if we make it look like concern. It was methodical, soulless. They were coordinating her erasure like they were planning a renovation. Cassidy played it twice, once in disbelief, the second time in resolve. Then she sent it to Ava. They filed an emergency motion with the court the next morning. The day of the hearing, Cassidy wore a black blouse, her grandmother's bracelet, and the calm of someone who had nothing left to prove. The courtroom was cold, sterile, in the way that justice always feels just slightly removed from real life. Martin sat at the defense table in a suit more polished than sincere. Diane's eyes darted from the judge to the floor. Riley wore a white blouse and a smirk so faint it could have passed for confusion. Ava presented the timeline, the documents, and the audio evidence. Then the judge turned to Cassidy. She stood. Not with fire, but with fact. "I bought that house, alone. I paid every mortgage. I mowed that lawn, fixed that faucet, replaced that wiring. And while I was working double shifts to hold on to it, my family was filing forged claims, changing passwords, and making plans to remove me. Not because I failed them, but because I succeeded without needing them." The silence afterward was thick. Then the judge leaned forward. "This court finds in favor of Cassidy Sloan. The property is solely hers. The court also upholds the restraining order and refers the identity theft claims to the state's Financial Crimes Division." Cassidy didn't smile. She didn't need to. Her silence said enough. Outside the courthouse, a reporter caught up to her. "Do you feel justice was served?" She paused, then answered, "Justice is knowing I never have to ask for their approval again." The house felt different when she returned, not yet healed, but waiting. She entered slowly, turning the key that now only matched her hand. The scent was off, too sterile, so she opened windows, let the air shift. She pulled down the stiff curtains and replaced them with soft ones she had hemmed herself. Every drawer she opened held some ghost, an object misplaced, a mug she hadn't bought. She boxed them up, labeled each one theirs, not in anger, but in clarity. In the kitchen drawer, tucked behind the utensils, she found an envelope. Diane's handwriting. Inside was a letter, printed, precise. "You'll understand someday. This wasn't malice. This was protection. We meant well. You were always too independent." Cassidy didn't finish reading. She lit the corner with a match and dropped it into the fire pit on the back porch. The ash rose gently, like something finally letting go. Weeks passed. The restraining order held. The bank restored her identity profile. Diane sent a Christmas card. Generic, impersonal, signed, "Wishing you clarity and peace." Riley said nothing. Martin sent a check without a note. Cassidy mailed it back, torn in half. She redecorated room by room, new art, new bedding, new plants on the windowsill. But she didn't erase everything. Some marks she kept, scratches on the hardwood, a chip in the stair rail, because they were hers. Proof she had lived here before the story got twisted. On New Year's Eve, Jordan invited her to brunch. "Chosen family only," she said. Cassidy didn't bring a gift. She brought herself. That night, she stood on her porch in thick socks and a sweater that smelled like pine. She held a mug of coffee, now lukewarm, and looked out at the street that had once watched her unravel. "They tried to take my home," she whispered, "but they couldn't take the woman who built it." She turned, stepped inside, and locked the door, not in fear, but in peace. What did this story stir in you? Did it remind you of anything you've lived through or someone you know? If this story moved you, comment 100 below to let us know. Tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your country. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that survival can be its own kind of justice. Thank you for watching Life Stories.